Mark's old blue car rattled down Willow Creek Road, the same route he'd driven 1,000 times. Sarah sat beside him, humming along to the radio. It was their usual after-school routine. Mark picked her up, they talked about their day, and he dropped her off at her house. Simple. For years, it had been just them. Mark and Sarah had known each other since they were little kids, building forts in the woods behind their houses. Mark always looked out for Sarah. He helped her with her math homework, made sure no one picked on her during recess, and even walked her home when it rained. They were best friends, plain and simple. Mark was a quiet guy with messy brown hair and kind eyes. He liked fixing things and dreamed of becoming a mechanic. Sarah was bubbly and bright, with a smile that could light up a room. She loved to draw and wanted to be an artist. They were different, but they fit together perfectly. The familiar houses of Willow Creek Road passed by. Mark glanced at Sarah. Her hair seemed longer, and she was wearing a new necklace with a small, silver star. He suddenly noticed she wasn't wearing the childish backpack she used to have. It was a more grown-up shoulder bag. When did that happen? Mark wondered. He hadn't really noticed the small changes. He was used to seeing her every day. It was easy to miss things when they were always there. He shook his head slightly, focusing back on the road. Just another ordinary Tuesday. Or so he thought. The truth was, Sarah had been acting different for weeks. It wasn't anything big, just little things Mark couldn't quite put his finger on. She'd started wearing a touch of lip gloss, a subtle strawberry flavor he sometimes caught a whiff of when she laughed. Her laughter, too, seemed different, a little softer, a little more knowing. She'd also started staying later after school for art club, which Mark knew was really just a chance for her to hang out with the older kids. He felt a strange pang of something he couldn't name whenever she mentioned it. He told himself it was just because he missed having her around. He remembered one day, about a month ago, when he saw her talking to Jake Miller, the star quarterback. Jake was leaning in close, laughing at something Sarah said, and Sarah was smiling back, her eyes sparkling. Mark had felt a sudden urge to walk over and interrupt, to pull Sarah away. But he hadn't. He just stood there, feeling awkward. He chalked it up to being protective. Sarah was his best friend, and he always wanted to make sure she was okay. But deep down, he knew it was something more. Something he wasn't ready to admit, even to himself. He was starting to see Sarah not just as his friend, but as something more. And that scared him. It was easier to ignore the changes, to pretend everything was still the same. But today, something felt different. Today, the changes were harder to ignore. The car ride continued, filled with their usual easy banter. They talked about Mr. Harrison's boring history lecture and the upcoming school dance. Sarah mentioned a new dress she was thinking of buying, and Mark, trying to sound casual, asked what color it was. Maybe blue, she said, glancing at him with a playful smile. Or maybe something bolder. What do you think, Mark? He shrugged, feeling his cheeks flush. Whatever you like, he mumbled, focusing on the road. He could feel her eyes on him, but he avoided looking back. He wasn't sure what she was trying to do, but he didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing him flustered. He thought about the dance. He hadn't planned on going. Dances weren't really his thing. But if Sarah was going, well, maybe he could make an exception. He imagined her in a blue dress, her hair down, dancing with Jake Miller. The thought made his stomach clench. He quickly pushed the image away. He was being ridiculous. Sarah was his friend. He shouldn't be thinking about her like that. But the thoughts kept creeping in, uninvited and persistent. He tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics, like the latest superhero movie and the upcoming football game. But even as he talked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something big. As Mark pulled up to Sarah's house, an unusual quiet hung in the air. Usually, Mrs. Davis's flower garden was a splash of color, and the sound of her humming as she tended to the roses filled the air. Today, the garden was still, the flowers drooping slightly in the afternoon heat. Even Buster, the family's golden retriever, wasn't barking his usual greeting from the porch. Sarah fidgeted with the strap of her bag, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a nervous energy. She kept glancing at the front door, as if expecting someone to appear. Mark cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension in the car. He noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Yeah, everything's fine," she said, but her voice didn't sound convincing. She looked away, out the window, her gaze fixed on the empty driveway. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Mark felt a knot forming in his stomach. Something was definitely off. The air felt charged, like a storm was about to break. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest, for Sarah to say something, anything, to break the unsettling quiet. He had a feeling that whatever she was about to say would change everything. Finally, Sarah turned to him, her eyes meeting his. A small, hesitant smile played on her lips. "They're not home," she said, her voice barely audible. "Wanna come in?" Mark blinked, surprised. He'd never been inside Sarah's house without her parents around. It felt different. A little forbidden. Before he could answer, Sarah's smile widened, a mischievous glint appearing in her eyes. "Oh," she added, her voice suddenly brighter, almost teasing. "I turned 18 today." The words hung in the air, changing everything. 18. It was a milestone, a turning point. It meant Sarah was an adult, capable of making her own choices. And she was inviting him into her house, alone. Mark's mind raced. He wasn't sure what to say, what to do. This wasn't the Sarah he knew, the Sarah he'd built forts with and helped with her homework. This was a new Sarah, a Sarah he didn't quite understand, but was suddenly very, very interested in getting to know. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. The familiar routine had shattered, replaced by a sense of possibility, of uncertainty, and a thrill of something he couldn't quite name. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and Mark knew, with a certainty that made his heart pound, that nothing would ever be the same again. Mark's mind was a whirlwind. He wanted to say yes, more than anything. The thought of spending time alone with Sarah, especially now that she was 18, was incredibly appealing. But a part of him hesitated. Was this a good idea? He was still trying to process the changes he'd noticed in her, the confusing feelings they stirred up in him. Going inside her house felt like crossing a line, a point of no return. He thought about his promise to Mr. and Mrs. Davis, years ago, when they were kids. They'd asked him to always look out for Sarah, to be a good friend. Was going inside her house, with them not home, being a good friend? Or was it taking advantage of the situation? He pictured his dad's face, hearing about this. His dad always told him to be respectful, to treat women right. Would his dad approve of this? He looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. He could see a hint of vulnerability beneath her newfound confidence. She was waiting for his answer, and he knew that whatever he said next would define their relationship from this point forward. He had to choose carefully. He had to be honest, not just with Sarah, but with himself. What did he really want? And was he ready for the consequences? This was more than just a casual invitation, it was a test. And he wasn't sure he was ready to take it. He remembered the time Sarah had fallen out of the treehouse they built, scraping her knee badly. He'd carried her all the way back to her house, tears streaming down his face, more worried than he'd ever been in his life. Mrs. Davis had praised him for being such a good friend, telling him he was like a brother to Sarah. Another memory surfaced, the school play in 5th grade. Sarah had forgotten her lines, and Mark, seeing her panic, had whispered them to her from the wings. She'd finished the scene flawlessly, and afterwards, she'd given him the biggest hug he'd ever received. He could still feel the warmth of her embrace, the feeling of her small body pressed against his. He recalled the summer they spent catching fireflies in the field behind their houses. They'd stayed out until late, the air thick with the sweet scent of honeysuckle, their laughter echoing through the darkness. He had carefully placed each firefly into a glass jar, creating a miniature galaxy for Sarah to admire. These memories, these shared moments, flooded his mind, reminding him of the deep connection they shared, the unwavering bond that had defined their lives for so long. And now, that bond was being tested, threatened by something new and unfamiliar. He wasn't sure if he was ready to risk losing it all. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He looked at Sarah, her eyes still locked on his, waiting for his answer. He knew he couldn't stay in the car forever. He had to make a decision. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, I'll come in." Sarah's face lit up, her smile radiant. She reached for the door handle, a newfound excitement bubbling within her. Mark followed her out of the car, his legs feeling a little shaky. As they walked towards the house, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, a feeling that he was stepping into uncharted territory. Sarah unlocked the front door, the click of the lock echoing in the silence. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, gesturing for Mark to follow. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and cinnamon, a familiar scent that usually brought him comfort. But today, it felt different, charged with a new and unfamiliar energy. The living room was bathed in soft afternoon light, the furniture neatly arranged, the air still and quiet. It felt strangely intimate, being inside Sarah's house without her parents around. He felt like he was seeing a different side of her, a side that had been hidden until now. He wondered what else she was hiding, what secrets she held within her. He was about to find out. "Want something to drink?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. "I think there's some juice in the fridge." Mark nodded, still feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Sure, that sounds good." Sarah led him through the living room and into the kitchen, a bright and cheerful space with yellow walls and a checkered floor. A vase of sunflowers sat on the kitchen table, their faces turned towards the window. The fridge was covered in magnets, holding up photos, drawings, and notes. It felt like a glimpse into Sarah's world, a world he'd only ever seen from the outside. She opened the fridge and pulled out a carton of orange juice. "Glasses are in here," she said, pointing to a cupboard. Mark grabbed 2 glasses and set them on the counter. As Sarah poured the juice, he leaned against the counter, watching her. He noticed the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the way her lips curved into a slight smile as she concentrated on pouring. "So," she said, handing him a glass. "Happy birthday to me." "Happy birthday," Mark replied, raising his glass. He took a sip of the juice, the sweet taste doing little to calm the butterflies fluttering in his stomach. He knew this was just the beginning. The real conversation, the real turning point, was yet to come. He just didn't know what it would be. Sarah gestured towards the kitchen table. "Let's sit down," she said. They sat opposite each other, the vase of sunflowers separating them like a bright yellow barrier. "So," Sarah began, her voice a little hesitant. 18. "It's kind of a big deal, right?" Mark nodded. "Yeah, it is." "What are you going to do to celebrate?" Sarah shrugged. "I don't know. My parents said they'd take me out to dinner next week. But I kind of wanted to do something different today." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "Something special." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He knew what she was hinting at. This was it. The moment of truth. "What did you have in mind?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't know," she said. Maybe we could look at some old photos? Remember that time we tried to bake a cake and it turned into a complete disaster?" Mark chuckled, relieved that she was steering the conversation in a lighter direction. "How could I forget? It looked like a mud pie." "Or what about that time we got lost in the woods and had to spend the night sleeping under the stars?" Sarah continued, a nostalgic smile on her face. "That was actually kind of fun," Mark admitted. "Except for all the bug bites." It felt good to reminisce, to remember the simple, carefree days of their childhood. But Mark knew that they couldn't stay in the past forever. Sooner or later, they would have to confront the present and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Sarah got up and went to a shelf in the living room, returning with a large, dusty photo album. She carefully placed it on the kitchen table, and they both leaned in, flipping through the pages. There they were, frozen in time, tiny, awkward versions of themselves. Mark pointed to a photo of Sarah wearing a princess costume, her face covered in glitter. "Remember that? You refused to take that crown off for like a week." Sarah laughed. "It was my favorite. And look at you, with that goofy grin and missing tooth." They turned the page, finding a picture of them covered in mud after a particularly adventurous day in the woods. "We were so gross," Sarah said, wrinkling her nose. "But we didn't care." Each photo brought back a flood of memories: birthday parties, school dances, summer vacations. They reminisced about inside jokes, embarrassing moments, and shared dreams. They laughed, they cringed, they remembered. As they flipped through the album, Mark felt a warmth spread through him. He realized how much they had been through together, how deeply connected they were. Their friendship was a tapestry woven with shared experiences, with laughter and tears, with unwavering support and unconditional love. But as he looked at Sarah, at the way her eyes sparkled in the soft light, he knew that the tapestry was about to change. A new thread was about to be added, a thread that could either strengthen the fabric or unravel it completely. Sarah closed the photo album, her fingers lingering on the cover. The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet intensity. She looked at Mark, her eyes serious. "Mark," she said softly. "There's something I need to tell you." Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He knew this was it. The moment he'd been dreading and anticipating all afternoon. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah took a deep breath. I don't think things can stay the way they are between us," she said, choosing her words carefully. I think I feel differently about you now." Mark swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He wasn't sure what to say. He'd suspected this was coming, but hearing her say it out loud was different. It made it real. "I know we've been friends forever," Sarah continued, "and I don't want to ruin that. But I can't pretend anymore. I really like you, Mark. More than just a friend." She looked down at her hands, her cheeks flushed. "I know this might be awkward, and you might not feel the same way. But I had to tell you. It's been building up for so long, and I couldn't keep it in any longer." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Mark's mind was racing. He knew he felt something for Sarah too, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to admit it, not even to himself. He looked at her vulnerable expression, and knew he had to be honest. He owed her that much. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her. He saw the girl he'd known his entire life, the girl he'd protected, the girl he'd laughed with. But he also saw something more, a beautiful, competent young woman who was brave enough to tell him how she felt. He couldn't deny that he felt something for her too. He'd been trying to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't there, but Sarah's confession had shattered his carefully constructed wall of denial. He liked her. A lot. But what if it didn't work out? What if they tried to be more than friends and ended up ruining everything? Could he live with that? Could he risk losing her completely? He also thought about the future. They were both about to graduate, about to go their separate ways. Sarah was planning on going to art school in another city. He was staying here, working at his dad's auto shop. Could a relationship even work, with so much distance between them? And then there was the question of timing. Was he ready for this? Was he ready for the responsibility of a relationship? He was still figuring out his own life, still trying to decide what he wanted to do. Was he ready to commit to something so serious? He looked back at Sarah, her eyes filled with hope and vulnerability. He knew he couldn't keep her waiting any longer. He had to say something. He had to be honest, not just with her, but with himself. He had to decide what he really wanted. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Her skin was soft and warm, sending a shiver down his spine. He looked into her eyes, seeing a mixture of hope, fear, and something else he couldn't quite name. Something that mirrored his own feelings. "Sarah," he said, his voice husky. I like you too." A small smile bloomed on her face. "You do?" He nodded, unable to speak. He leaned closer, his gaze fixed on her lips. He could feel her breath on his face, the scent of strawberries and something uniquely Sarah. He hesitated for a moment, then closed the distance between them. His lips met hers in a tentative, hesitant kiss. It was soft and sweet, a mixture of innocence and desire. Sarah kissed him back, her fingers tightening around his hand. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more real. It was a kiss that had been years in the making, a kiss that sealed their fate, a kiss that changed everything. In that moment, all of Mark's doubts and fears disappeared. He didn't care about the future, about the distance, about the risks. All that mattered was Sarah, right here, right now. He was lost in the moment, lost in her. He knew, with a certainty that made his heart soar, that he wanted to be with her, no matter what. This was just the beginning. Suddenly, the shrill ring of Sarah's cell phone shattered the moment. They both jumped, startled by the intrusion. Sarah reluctantly pulled away from Mark, her cheeks flushed. "Sorry," she mumbled, reaching for her phone, which was lying on the kitchen table. She glanced at the caller ID. "It's my mom." Mark stepped back, feeling a wave of awkwardness wash over him. The spell was broken. The real world was crashing back in. Sarah answered the phone, her voice suddenly bright and cheerful. "Hi, Mom." "Yeah, I'm just hanging out at home." "Oh, really? That sounds great." "Okay, I'll be ready." "Love you too." She hung up the phone and turned back to Mark, her expression a mixture of disappointment and resignation. "That was my mom," she said. "They're on their way home. They're picking me up to go out to dinner." Mark nodded, unsure of what to say. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They couldn't just stay here, lost in their own little world. They had to face the future, the distance, the risks. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway echoed through the house. Sarah's parents were here. "I guess that's my cue," Sarah said, her voice tinged with sadness. Mark nodded again, his heart heavy. He knew this wasn't the end, but it was definitely a turning point. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. They had to decide what came next. Mark helped Sarah tidy up the kitchen, a comfortable silence settling between them. As they worked, they stole glances at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. "So," Mark said, breaking the silence, "what do we do now?" Sarah sighed. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's kind of scary, right? Everything's changing." "Yeah," Mark agreed. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." "But what about art school?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern. "And what about your job? How can we even make this work?" Mark thought for a moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I'm willing to try." "If you are." Sarah smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I am," she said. "I really am." "Maybe we can try the long-distance thing," Mark suggested. "We can visit each other, call each other, text each other. It won't be easy, but we can make it work." "And maybe," Sarah added, "maybe you can come visit me at art school. I can show you all the cool places." "I'd like that," Mark said, his heart lighter than it had been all day. They decided to take things slow, to see where their feelings led them. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but they were willing to face them together. They weren't just friends anymore, but they weren't quite a couple either. They were something in between, something new and exciting. Something worth fighting for. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of Sarah's parents. It was time for Mark to go. Later that evening, Mark drove Sarah home after her birthday dinner with her family. The car ride was different this time. There was no casual banter, no easy laughter. Instead, a comfortable silence filled the space, a silence that spoke volumes. As he pulled up to her house, Sarah turned to him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Thanks for today, Mark," she said softly. "It was special." "It was," Mark agreed, returning her gaze. He leaned over and gently kissed her goodbye, a quick, chaste kiss that still sent a jolt of electricity through him. Sarah smiled. "I'll text you later?" "Definitely," Mark said. Sarah got out of the car and walked towards her front door. But this time, she didn't just wave goodbye and disappear inside. She turned around, looked over her shoulder, and gave Mark a knowing smile. A smile that said, "This is just the beginning." Mark watched her go, his heart filled with hope and anticipation. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for the challenge. He was ready to face the future, whatever it may hold, with Sarah by his side. He put the car in gear and drove away, leaving Sarah's house behind. But he knew that a part of him would always be there, waiting for her. Waiting for their next adventure to begin. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, their story was just beginning.